The distress signal came in at 0300 hours, when most of the crew of the Enduring Grace was asleep. Lieutenant Commander Cole Hartley was not asleep. He rarely was at that hour. He sat in the small observation bay at the back of the ship, a cup of cold coffee in his hand, watching the stars drift past in long, slow silence. He was 34 years old, lean in the way that people get when they forget to eat regularly, with dark circles under his eyes that had become permanent somewhere around his second year in deep space. He was not a remarkable-looking man. That had always worked in his favor. The alert that came through his earpiece was soft, almost apologetic. He was on the bridge inside 2 minutes. Ensign Diana Reeves was already there, her short brown hair still slightly flattened on one side from sleep, pulled data onto the main screen with quick, practiced hands. She looked up when Cole walked in. "Picked it up about 4 minutes ago," she said. "Vorath emergency frequency. Automated signal running on backup power. Whatever sent it is barely holding together." Cole looked at the coordinates. They were close. Closer than Vorath ships had any reason to be in this stretch of space, which sat technically within the gray zone between human exploration territory and the edge of Vorath Dominion space. Ships passed through it sometimes. They did not usually die in it. "How big?" he asked. "Warship class," Diana said. "A big one, or what's left of it." Captain Louise Farrow arrived on the bridge 4 minutes after Cole, already dressed and already alert in the way that experienced officers learn to be, like a light that never fully goes out. She looked at the screen for a long moment without speaking. "Any response to our hail?" she asked. "Nothing," Diana said. "The automated signal is the only thing broadcasting. Whatever crew is left either can't respond or won't." Captain Farrow looked at Cole. He looked back at her. They had served together long enough that entire conversations happened in the space between those looks. "Take a team," she said. "Small. Find out what happened." The wreck was worse up close. Cole and a 4-person boarding team crossed in a small shuttle and docked at the Vorath ship's secondary airlock, which was the only one still intact. The main hull had been torn open on the port side, the metal peeled back in the way that only happens from an explosion originating inside the ship. Whatever had destroyed this vessel had come from within. The corridors were dark except for the red emergency lighting, which cast everything in a color that Cole had always felt was the universe's way of saying, "Turn around." He did not turn around. He moved through the ship slowly and carefully, his team fanning out around him, all of them quiet. The crew was dead. Most of them had died near their stations, which told Cole they had not seen it coming until it was too late. Some of the bodies wore the armor of the Royal Guard, the elite military unit that answered only to the Vorath royal family. Cole crouched next to one for a moment and looked at the markings. Something about that sat wrong with him. The Royal Guard did not travel on standard warships. They went where the royal family went. "Cole!" Diana's voice came through his earpiece. She was the only person on the ship who called him by his first name. "I'm at the center chamber, sealed from the inside. There's a life sign." It took them 11 minutes to cut through the door. The room behind it was small and bare, clearly designed as a last refuge, the kind of place built into warships for exactly the kind of catastrophe that had apparently just occurred. The air inside was stale and thin and cold. She was in the far corner. Cole had seen Vorath before, in briefings and in the handful of diplomatic exchanges humanity had managed with them over the past 20 years. He knew the basic shape of them, tall and long-limbed, with skin that shifted color in slow, subtle patterns, the way deep water does when light moves across it. He knew they regarded humans with the particular brand of distant disinterest that very old civilizations sometimes have for very young ones. He was not fully prepared for this. She was chained to the wall. Actual chains, heavy and deliberate, the kind that were meant to hold and humiliate in equal measure. Her skin, which Cole understood was usually a deep blue-green, had gone pale and dull in the way that living things go when they are close to the edge. There was dried blood on her temple. Her eyes were open. They were gold. He hadn't known Vorath eyes could be that color. He would later learn that it was rare, and that among her people it was considered a mark of the royal line. She watched him cross the room toward her. She did not flinch. She did not speak. She simply watched him with those gold eyes, steady and exhausted, while he looked at the chains and then looked around the room for something to cut them with. One of his team handed him a cutter without being asked. He worked through the chains without rushing, without asking her anything, without trying to explain who he was or what he intended. There would be time for that. Right now, the chains needed to come off. When the last one fell away, she sagged forward slightly, and Cole caught her by the arm without thinking about it. She was heavier than he expected. She let him hold her weight for a moment, just a moment, and then she straightened. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, in careful and precise human standard language that surprised him completely, "You did not ask me anything first." "No," Cole said. "Why not?" He thought about it honestly. "Because it could wait," he said. She looked at him for another long moment. Then she nodded once, very slowly, as if he had answered a question she had been carrying for much longer than the past few hours. They got her out of there and back to the enduring grace, and the stars outside the shuttle windows were cold and very far away, and somewhere behind them, the ruined Vorath warship drifted on in the dark without anyone left to mourn it. 3 weeks in the void between stars is a long time to be anywhere with someone you do not understand. Sivara Velketh did not sleep the way humans slept. She would go still for a few hours at a time, sitting upright in the medical bay cot with her eyes half closed and her skin cycling through slow, dim colors that the ship's doctor, a quiet man named Greg Pulley, said were probably the Vorath equivalent of dreaming. Greg was careful around her in the way that people are careful around things they find genuinely fascinating but do not want to offend. She seemed to tolerate him fine. She tolerated most of the crew from a distance. She watched them move through their routines with the focused patience of someone studying something they had previously only read about. When crew members passed her in the corridor, she would observe them the way a person observes weather, noting it, filing it away, not particularly moved by it in either direction. Cole was different. She had decided that on the first day, and nothing in the 3 weeks since had changed it. He brought her meals himself, not because it was his job, but because nobody else quite knew how to handle the silence she carried with her into every room. He would set the food down, sit across from her if she seemed open to it, and say nothing unless she spoke first. Sometimes she didn't. That was fine with him. He had grown up with a father who communicated mostly in long silences, and had learned early that silence between two people did not have to mean something was wrong. Slowly, in pieces, she began to talk. Not about herself at first. She asked questions. About the ship, about the crew, about how human vessels were organized and why they were built the way they were. Cole answered everything plainly and without embellishment. She seemed to appreciate that. He got the sense that she had spent a great deal of her life being spoken to in embellishments, in careful diplomatic language full of beautiful words arranged around the absence of truth. On the 9th day, she told him her name in full. Not the shortened version she had offered to Captain Farrow and Ambassador Declan Voss when they had formally introduced themselves, but her full Vorath name, which took nearly 20 seconds to say properly, and which Cole attempted and failed at 3 times before she made a sound he eventually understood was laughter. "You may continue calling me Sivara," she said. "Appreciate that," he said. On the 12th day, she told him about the coup. She did it quietly and without drama, the way people tell stories they have already survived and are now simply trying to make sense of. The Keth ascendancy had been building for years, she said. A coalition of traditional hardliners who believed the Vorath Dominion had grown soft, had opened itself too much to outside contact, had allowed the royal line to drift from the old values that had made the Dominion great 3 centuries ago. They had powerful backers among the outer systems, wealthy trade interests who wanted fewer regulations and fewer questions from a central government. 3 of her siblings were dead. She said it the way you say something when you have already spent a great deal of private time with the weight of it and have reached the point where saying it out loud does not break you, but costs something every single time. Cole did not say he was sorry. She did not seem to want that. He asked instead what her siblings had been like, and something in her expression shifted slightly, and she told him about them for almost an hour. "Why do you talk to me?" she asked him eventually, and not to the ambassador. Cole considered being diplomatic about it. He decided against it. "Because Declan Voss wants something from you," he said. "He's been wanting it since before he even boarded this ship. I find it difficult to have honest conversations with people who've already decided what they need from me. And you want nothing." "I didn't say that." He looked at her evenly. "I want you to be alive in 6 months. That's what I want." She was quiet for a while after that. Declan Voss was not a bad man. Cole had worked with genuinely bad men and knew the difference. Declan was simply a man who had spent so many years in interstellar politics that he had stopped being able to see people clearly and could now only see their strategic value. He saw Savara as a significant asset and a significant liability in almost equal measure, and he wanted her placed in neutral hands as quickly as possible, which in practice meant a galactic council chamber where her fate would be managed by a committee and where she would almost certainly be dead within the month. He made his case to Captain Farrow in her office on the 14th day. Cole was present because Farrow had asked him to be. "The safest course," Declan said, "is the one that removes us from the equation. We hand her to the council, we file our reports, we go home." "Safe for who?" Cole said. Declan looked at him with the patient tolerance of a man who considers himself several levels above the conversation he's being forced to have. "Safe for this ship. Safe for humanity's relationship with whatever emerges from the Dominion's current difficulties." "She'll be dead before any council meeting is scheduled," Cole said. "And we both know that." Declan said nothing, which was, Cole thought, its own kind of answer. Farrow looked at her desk for a moment. Then she looked at Cole. "What would you suggest instead?" Before he could answer, Diana's voice came over the ship intercom, and her voice had the particular flatness it got when she was working hard to sound calm. "Captain, you're going to want to come to the bridge. We have contacts on the long-range scanner. Vorath military configuration. A lot of them." The room went very quiet. Cole looked at Savara, who had come to stand in the doorway without any of them noticing. Her skin had gone a deep, still color he had not seen before. She was looking at the intercom speaker the way a person looks at something they always knew was coming, but had quietly hoped might not. "How many?" Farrow asked the intercom. "Enough," Diana said. "They're not moving yet. They're just watching us." Cole stood up. "Then we have a little time," he said. "Let's not waste it." The plan, when Cole explained it to Captain Farrow, sounded almost into the margin. The margin was what everyone called the stretch of loosely governed space that sat between human territory and the Vorath Dominion's outer edge. It wasn't lawless exactly, but it was the kind of place where the law took a long time to arrive and rarely stayed for dinner. It was full of human trade outposts, small refueling stations, cargo depots, and the kind of people who had decided they preferred to live somewhere that large governments had not yet gotten around to organizing properly. It was also, Cole pointed out, the last place a Vorath military fleet would go looking for a missing princess, because no Vorath military officer with any dignity would believe that a member of the royal line had been taken there. Savara, standing at the edge of the room, said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "You want to hide me in a trading post?" "Several of them," Cole said, "moving between them, on a cargo freighter." She looked at him with an expression that was difficult to read, which was true of most of her expressions, but which Cole was starting to learn contained layers if you were patient enough to wait for them. "My people built the first interstellar navigation charts used by 4 civilizations," she said. "We have been traveling between stars for 900 years. "I know," Cole said. "And the Ascendancy will spend the next 2 weeks looking for a response worthy of that history. They'll be checking diplomatic channels and military corridors and neutral council stations. They will not be checking a second-hand freighter hauling what the manifest says is emergency medical equipment bound for a refueling depot called Outpost 11. She looked at him for a long moment. And if they find us anyway, then we deal with that when it happens, he said. But at least we'll have bought time. She thought about it. She thought about it longer than Cole would have, because she was the kind of person who had been trained from birth to consider every angle of a decision before making it, which was a good quality in a future ruler, and a slightly inconvenient one when someone needed an answer in the next 4 hours. "All right," she said finally. Captain Farrow took the Enduring Grace on a clean, well-logged, entirely visible course toward human space, moving at standard speed with all her transponders broadcasting clearly. She was the bait, and she accepted that role with the same calm she applied to everything, which Cole had always found quietly impressive. Cole, Diana, Savara, and 3 crew members transferred to a battered cargo freighter called the Odell County, which belonged technically to a human freight company and practically to a semi-retired smuggler named Lou Carver, who owed Captain Farrow a favor of the kind that doesn't get discussed in polite company. Lou handed over the ship's codes without complaint, took a shuttle to the nearest outpost, and did not ask any questions, which Cole appreciated more than he could say. The Odell County was not a beautiful ship. It smelled like engine grease and old food and something indefinable that Diana described as the accumulated regret of everyone who had ever worked aboard it. The bunk beds were narrow, and the heating system worked in 3 out of 5 sections on a good day. Savara stood in the middle of the main corridor on the first day and looked at the ceiling and the walls and the general condition of everything around her with an expression that Cole could only describe as a person quietly recalibrating their understanding of what a difficult situation actually meant. "It flies," Cole told her. "Yes," she said carefully. "It does appear to do that." She adapted. That was the thing about Savara that Cole kept noticing. She adapted the way water adapts, not by forcing anything, but by finding the shape of whatever she was in and settling into it without complaint. Within 2 days, she knew the ship's layout better than 2 of their own crew members. Within 4 days, she had fixed a recurring fault in the secondary navigation panel that Lou Carver had apparently been ignoring for the better part of a year. Diana watched her work on it for a while and then said, "Where did you learn to do that?" "I was not permitted to learn," Savara said, not looking up from the panel. "So I learned anyway." Diana considered this. "Yeah," she said, "that tracks." The margin opened up around them as they moved deeper into it, the outposts appearing on the scanner one by one like small, scattered lights. They stopped at the first 2 without incident, moving through the routines of a standard cargo delivery with the kind of performance that Cole had to admit his team was better at than he had expected. Diana in particular had a gift for looking bored that Cole found genuinely admirable. It was at the 3rd stop, a small outpost called Carey's Junction, that something shifted. The station was modest and a little worn, the kind of place that had been built for function 30 years ago and had never quite gotten around to aesthetics since. There was a common area near the docking bay where station workers and transient crews ate and passed time between runs. A man named Pete, who worked maintenance on the station and had broad shoulders and grease on his hands and the manner of someone who had never once in his life tried to impress anybody, was eating alone at one of the tables when Cole's crew came in. He looked up, took in the group, let his eyes pass over Savara with nothing more than mild curiosity, and then held out a plate of food he hadn't started yet. "You look like you've been traveling a while," he said to her. "They just made a fresh batch. Take it, I can get more." Savara looked at the plate. She looked at Pete. There was nothing in his face except the ordinary, uncomplicated kindness of a person who noticed that someone looked tired and did the small available thing about it. She took the plate. She sat down. Pete nodded once and went to get himself another serving, and that was the whole of it. Cole watched from across the room and said nothing. Diana appeared at his shoulder. "She's never had someone do that before," Diana said quietly. "Has she? Just give her something. No reason, no angle." Probably not, Cole said. They were back on the Odell County and 2 hours out from Carey's Junction when the Ascendancy found them. It was a single patrol vessel, smaller than a warship but fast and well-armed, and it dropped out of transit directly across their path with the confidence of a ship that had been given a specific location by someone who knew exactly where to look. Somebody at one of the outposts had talked or sold the information, or both. It didn't matter which right now. The patrol vessel hailed them and demanded they stop for inspection. Cole answered the hail himself. He was calm in the way that people are calm when they are genuinely a little afraid, and have decided that being afraid is not useful information to share. What followed was 40 minutes of the most exhausting conversation of Cole's life. He cited interstellar transit codes. He cited human Vorath commercial passage agreements from a treaty signed 11 years ago that he had read once and apparently retained. He questioned the patrol officer's authority to stop a registered human freight vessel in a gray zone corridor without formal cause filed with a neutral arbitration body. He asked politely whether the officer had the relevant documentation for the stop, and when the officer said he did not need documentation, Cole said with genuine respect that he understood that position, but that his company's legal obligations required him to note the objection formally, which would of course mean a filing with the Joint Commerce Council, which generally took 6 to 8 months to process, but which would certainly... The patrol officer ended the hail. 40 seconds later, the patrol vessel moved off their course. Diana let out a breath. One of the crew members put his face in his hands. Savara stood very still. She looked at Cole. "You won that with words," she said. "We usually try words first," he said. He was fairly sure his hands had been shaking for the last 20 minutes, but he kept them still. "Saves on the cleanup." She looked at him for a long moment, and her skin moved through a color he hadn't seen before, something warm and deep, and he didn't know yet what it meant in Vorath terms, but it didn't look like anything bad. They went back to their course, and the margin stretched out ahead of them, and somewhere behind them, the Ascendancy patrol vessel was filing a report that would eventually reach someone important, and Cole knew the window they had bought was not endless. But it was enough. For now, it was enough. Savara made the decision on a Tuesday. Cole knew it was Tuesday because Diana kept a small handwritten calendar on the wall above her bunk, and crossed off the days every morning with a kind of dedication that Cole found both endearing and faintly sad. It was the sort of thing people did when they needed to feel like time was still moving in an orderly direction, which, given everything, seemed fair. They were 4 days out from Carey's Junction, running quiet through the outer edge of the margin, when Savara came and found Cole in the engine room where he was pretending to check a fuel coupling and actually just thinking. She stood in the doorway for a moment and then came in and sat down on an equipment crate with the ease of someone who had stopped worrying about dignity somewhere around day 2 on the Odell County. "I want to go to Vel-Sarath," she said. Cole set down the tool he was holding. "That's inside Ascendancy-occupied territory right now." "Yes," she said. "They have forces on the ground there." "Yes," she said again with the patience of someone who understood that he already knew all of this and was simply working through it out loud, which was a habit of his she had apparently catalogued. He looked at her. "Tell me why." "Because there are people waiting," she said. "Former military officers, local governors, people who served the royal line and who have been sitting in the dark for months with no signal from anyone. They are not broken. They are waiting for a reason to move. If I do not go back, they will eventually stop waiting, and the Ascendancy will absorb them one by one, and Vel-Sarath will be gone in everything except name." Cole thought about this honestly. "And if we go back and it doesn't work?" "Then it doesn't work," she said simply. "But I will not sit on a borrowed freighter in the margin and watch my home become something else while I am still alive to prevent it." He picked up the tool again and turned it over in his hands once, and then set it back down. "All right," he said. Diana, when told, said several things in a row that are not worth repeating, and then started pulling up navigation charts, which was how Cole knew she was in. Velsorath from above looked the way a home looks when something has been wrong with it for a while but hasn't quite broken yet. The lights of the main settlements were dimmer than they should have been. There was ascendancy military traffic in the lower orbit, patrol patterns that moved with the mechanical regularity of forces that expected no real challenge. The Odell County came in low and slow on a freight approach vector, using codes that one of Savara's contacts on the surface had transmitted through 3 layers of encrypted relay, and nobody stopped them, and Cole did not fully breathe until they were on the ground. The resistance, when they met it, was not what any of them had expected. Cole had built a picture in his head somewhere along the way of a tight, organized group, disciplined and ready, waiting in a hidden location with a clear plan. What they found instead was about 40 people spread across 4 different locations, communicating through a system of couriers and coded messages because the Ascendancy had locked down most of the standard communication networks. They were determined, and they were angry, and some of them were very well trained, but they were not coordinated, and coordination was what they needed more than anything else right now. There was friction at first. Not hostility exactly, but the particular resistance that groups have when a stranger walks into a situation they have been living inside for months and starts talking about how things should be done. A former military commander named Velrath, a tall Vorath man with a scar along the left side of his jaw, and the bearing of someone who had spent his whole life being the most capable person in any room, looked at Cole for a long moment when they were introduced, and then looked at Savara. "You brought a human," he said. "I did," Savara said. "Why?" "Because he is here and he is useful and I trust him," she said, in a tone that indicated the conversation was now complete. Velrath looked at Cole for another moment. Cole looked back at him without any particular expression. They did not become friends that day, but something was established which was enough to work with. The friction resolved slowly, and not through any single moment, but through the accumulation of small things. Cole and Diana worked alongside the resistance members without positioning themselves above the operation or below it. They did what was needed. They listened more than they talked. They made mistakes and acknowledged them plainly and corrected course, which seemed to surprise people more than the mistakes themselves had. On the 4th day on Velsorath, they identified the problem that was sitting at the center of everything. The Ascendancy's hold on the outer systems, including Velsorath, was built on a coalition. Hardline traditionalists on one side, but on the other side 3 very large outer system trade consortiums that had funded the coup because they wanted a government that would leave their business arrangements alone. These consortiums were not ideological, they were practical. They had backed the Ascendancy because it was useful to them. If it became publicly known that they had funded the removal and attempted murder of the royal line, the political cost would be catastrophic. Other systems would withdraw support. The Ascendancy's coalition would fracture. Without the coalition, the military forces occupying worlds like Velsorath were stretched too thin to hold. The proof existed. Communications between the consortium leadership and the Ascendancy's inner council, stored in the command post the Ascendancy had established in Velsorath's old government district. If someone could get inside and pull that data, the whole structure could be broken from the inside without a single major battle. The problem was obvious. Any Vorath resistance member attempting to enter the command post would be recognized. The Ascendancy had detailed records on every known associate of the royal line. The risk of exposure was nearly certain. Cole thought about it for a while. Then he said, "I'll go." Velrath stared at him. "You?" "A human has no record in their system," Cole said. "They're not looking for a human inside their own command post. It's the last thing anyone expects." "That is because it is an insane thing to do," Velrath said. "Probably," Cole agreed, "but the logic still works." Diana told him it was a bad idea 3 times, and then spent 6 hours helping him prepare for it, which was the most honest expression of her opinion that she was capable of. He went in on a moonless night, using a maintenance access route that one of Velrath's people had mapped. He moved through the building slowly and carefully and without rushing, which was harder than it sounds when every instinct is telling you to hurry. He found the command post's data terminal in a side office on the second floor, accessed it using codes that Savara had provided from her own deep knowledge of Vorath military systems, and began the extraction. It took 9 minutes. In the 8th minute, a Vorath soldier came into the office. What happened next was brief and not particularly elegant, and left Cole with a deep bruise across his ribs and a cut above his left ear and the data drive in his pocket. The soldier was unconscious on the floor. Cole was out of the building 4 minutes later. He made it 2 streets away before his legs decided they were finished, and he sat down heavily against a wall and took stock of the situation. The data drive was intact. He was intact, mostly. His hands were shaking again, but this time he didn't bother trying to hide it. Diana found him 11 minutes later. She looked at the cut above his ear and the way he was holding his ribs, and the general state of him, and her expression went through several things very quickly. "I'm fine," he said. "You are not fine," she said in the flat voice she used when she was genuinely frightened and had decided that anger was the more useful response. Savara was waiting back at the safe house. When Cole came through the door, she looked at him for a long moment, and her skin went through that deep, warm color he had seen once before on the Odell County, but steadier this time, and longer. She crossed the room and put her hand briefly on his arm, just for a moment, in the way that meant something in Vorath culture that he did not yet have the vocabulary for, but understood anyway. "You got it," she said. "Yeah," he said. "Was it worth the state you're in?" He thought about it. "Ask me in a week," he said. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. It was getting easier to recognize when she did that. Outside, Vel-Sorath was quiet under its dimmed lights, and somewhere in a side office in the Ascendancy command post, a soldier was going to wake up with a headache and a lot of questions, and the clock on all of this had gotten considerably shorter. But they had what they needed, and that changed everything. 6 months is a long time. It is also sometimes exactly enough. The data that Cole pulled from the Ascendancy command post did not explode across the Dominion all at once. It moved the way important things often move, quietly at first, passed between the right people in the right order, each piece landing where it would do the most damage before the Ascendancy had time to explain it away. Savara and Velrath understood how information worked as a weapon better than anyone Cole had ever met, and they used it carefully and without waste. The first consortium withdrew its support 11 days after the extraction. They released a public statement full of careful language about reassessing commitments and evolving circumstances, which was the political way of saying they had seen the evidence and decided to be somewhere else when the consequences arrived. The second consortium followed 8 days later. The third held out for another 3 weeks and then collapsed all at once when 2 of its own senior members went public independently, each apparently hoping to be the first one to cooperate. Without the money and the political cover the consortiums had provided, the Ascendancy's coalition started coming apart in ways that no military force could hold together. Outer system governors who had been quietly compliant began making different calculations. Systems that had gone dark started broadcasting again. The Ascendancy forces on Vel-Sorath, who had never been as numerous as they projected, found themselves in the position of an army that has lost the argument and not yet admitted it. They surrendered without a final battle. Not all at once, not gracefully, but they surrendered, unit by unit over the course of 2 weeks, until the last Ascendancy commander on Vel-Sorath signed a formal cessation and was escorted to a transport by Velrath's people with more courtesy than most people felt he deserved. Diana watched the last transport leave from a rooftop with Cole and said, "That's it then." "That's it," Cole said. "Kinda quiet for an empire falling." "They didn't fall," Cole said. "They changed. There's a difference." Diana thought about that. "Is there?" "Savara thinks so," he said. "I'm starting to." The convening of all Vorath systems was the first in 300 years, and the fact that it happened at all was considered by most observers to be either a miracle or a sign that things had gotten desperate enough to force the impossible into being practical. Probably both. Sivara had spent 4 months working toward it, traveling between systems, meeting with governors and military leaders and civilian councils, making the case in person the way her people responded to best, face to face and without intermediaries. Cole went with her for most of it, not as a diplomat or an official presence, but simply as the person who made sure she ate when she forgot to, who sat outside meeting rooms and was there when she came out, who carried the data drives and handled the human-side logistics, and occasionally talked them through a difficult border crossing with an unreasonable amount of treaty law. Diana called him Sivara's shadow, which he didn't argue with. The convening itself was held on Vel Sorath, in the Great Assembly Hall in the Government District, 2 buildings down from the command post where Cole had gotten shot at 6 months earlier. He found that detail quietly funny. He did not mention it to anyone. The hall was full. Every system had sent representatives, which itself was something, because several of those systems had been on opposite sides of the last 3 months and were now sitting in the same room trying to look like that was not strange. Sivara stood at the center of it, and she was different from the woman Cole had cut off a wall in a dark ship corridor. Not unrecognizable, just fuller somehow, like a person who has found the shape they were always meant to occupy. She proposed a reformation, not a revolution, not a return to the old order exactly, but a restructuring of how the Dominion governed itself, with more authority given to individual systems, more transparency in the central government, and a formal process for exactly the kind of grievances that the Ascendancy had weaponized. It was not a perfect plan. She said so herself directly, which seemed to surprise half the room. A conservative faction pushed back. An older delegate from one of the inner systems stood and spoke at length about the integrity of Vorath tradition and the danger of outside influence. And then he looked directly at Cole, who was sitting quietly at the back of the hall with Diana, and he made his point with that look as clearly as he had with any of his words. Sivara let him finish. She did not look at Cole while the delegate spoke. She looked at the delegate. Then she spoke. She described the ship with its torn hull and its dead crew and the chains on the wall. She described waking up in the dark and not knowing if anyone was coming. She described a human officer who crossed the room and removed the chains without asking for anything first, and who then sat with her for 3 weeks on a long transit and answered every question she asked with plain honesty, and who went into an enemy command post alone so that her people would have what they needed to take their home back. She did not say he was extraordinary. She said he was present. She said he was honest. She said he treated her like a person at a moment when several members of her own species had decided she was a problem to be managed. I did not trust him because he was human, she said. I trusted him because of what he did. Those are not the same thing. We should be careful not to confuse them in either direction. The hall was quiet. The vote that followed was not unanimous. Real things never are. But it passed, and the Reformation moved forward, and the convening ended without anyone being escorted out by security, which Velrath said afterward was better than he had honestly expected. Cole was asked to remain on Velsorath for the formal recognition ceremony 3 days later. He almost said no, not out of modesty exactly, but out of the feeling that ceremonies were generally not designed with him in mind. Sivara told him to stay. He stayed. The title they gave him was old. The Vorath official who presented it explained that it translated imperfectly into human standard, but that the closest version was something between trusted witness and one who was present when it mattered. It was not a military honor, it was not a political one. It was something older than both, from a time when the Vorath marked the people who had stood beside them at the moments that defined things. Cole accepted it without a speech because he didn't have one prepared and didn't want to invent one on the spot. He said thank you in Vorath, which he had been practicing for 2 weeks, and he got the pronunciation almost right, and the Vorath official's expression suggested that the effort was noted and appreciated, even where the execution had fallen somewhat short. Diana took a picture. He told her not to. She did it anyway. That evening, Cole and Sivara stood on the wide terrace of the old royal house, which sat on a hill above the main city and looked out over everything. The city was coming back to life in the way that cities do after something difficult has passed through them. Not all at once, but steadily. Light returning to windows and sound returning to streets, and the general human, or in this case, Vorath, insistence on continuing to exist, reasserting itself quietly and without fanfare. They watched the lights come on below, one by one, in no particular order. "Can I ask you something?" Cole said. "You have never asked my permission before asking me something," Savara said. "I know. I'm trying to be more formal. You're essentially royalty." "Essentially," she said, with the tone that meant she was almost smiling. "Why the margin," he said, "when you could have gone anywhere, when you could have pushed to go to a council, or into human space, or a dozen other places? Why did you trust the plan?" She was quiet for a moment. Below them, a whole street of windows came on at once, and the city got a little brighter. "Because you did not make it sound like something grand," she said. "Every other person who has ever tried to help me has made it sound like something grand. You made it sound like the most reasonable available option, and you were honest about what it might cost, and you did not promise me anything you were not certain of." Cole thought about that. "That's a low bar," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is remarkable how rarely it is cleared." They stood there for a while longer, not saying much, while Vel Sorath continued the quiet work of becoming itself again. Somewhere in the city, someone was playing music. It drifted up to the terrace in pieces, not quite recognizable, but warm. Cole looked out at all those lights and thought about a dark ship corridor and a woman in chains who had watched him cross the room with gold eyes that did not ask for anything. And he thought about how strange it was that the largest things often begin in the smallest moments, in a hand that reaches without calculation, in a question left unasked, in the plain and ordinary decision to treat someone like they matter before you know whether it will cost you anything. It had cost him something. A bruised rib and a scar above his ear and 6 months of his life and a level of involvement in Vorath imperial politics that he suspected was going to follow him for a very long time. He found, standing there in the warm evening air with the city lights spreading out below him, that he did not mind.